Hi all, welcome back. Jake here from the Australian Reptile Park. I hope you are getting out in your backyard and enjoying this beautiful day as best you can. We certainly are. We've got Hugo out for his daily walk, and Hugo is our star male Galapagos Tortoise. He's a beautiful specimen. Now, he's just enjoying a little bit of lunch at the moment, so we thought we'd take this opportunity, to tell you a little bit about the difference between tortoises and turtles. Now, that is one of the most commonly asked questions we get here at the Reptile Park. What is the difference between the two? Now, whilst they are a little bit different in terms of their appearance, he likes to look at this turtle too, they are a little bit different. Now, they do both date back to an ancient lineage. They're both members of the family known as Testudines, which date back all the way to the middle Jurassic period. So they've been around for a very, very long time. But at some point, they diverge, and the tortoises have really evolved to spend the bulk of their time on the land. And you can see, what are you doing trying to bite me? You can see how well they are designed for doing that. They've got these huge club-like, elephant-like feet, which enables them to move around on the ground quite easily. It's very important to remember that Galapagos tortoise, like we have here, are found on the Galapagos archipelago. They're islands, they're volcanic islands, and they're not nice and lovely and smooth like this patch of grass we've got here right now. They're quite volcanic, they're quite rugged. And so I like to think of Galapagos tortoise as like a little mini four-wheel drive. They're really well designed and well evolved for going pretty well anywhere they need to. They can climb up quite steep inclines, get over boulders, do whatever they need to using these big elephant-like robust feet. Now, a turtle is a little bit different. And for us here in Australia, it's quite easy because we don't have to worry about tortoises. We do not have any native species of tortoise like this here. We only have turtles, and freshwater turtles primarily. We have about 30 species of freshwater turtle, and then several species of sea turtle that visit our shores periodically. Now, what I've got in my hand here, a fair bit smaller than Hugo, is one of our native Australian freshwater turtle species. This is known as a red-faced turtle, and you find this species up in the top of Western Australia and also into the Northern Territory. And right away, if I turn him over a little bit, you can see the difference in the structure of the feet. You saw those big, robust feet on the tortoise, Hugo here. What you'll see on a turtle is these small, typically quite thin, feet. They've got claws and they're webbed. They're really designed for moving around in the water as opposed to being on land like a tortoise. So that really is the main difference between the two. Now, Hugo's going on a bit of an adventure here at the moment, so we might head over and keep going with him. See what he wants to do. We might grab that other tortoise as well. Now, what we're feeding Hugo here today is a bit of hay at the bottom here, and then some natural browse that we've cut. This is some grass that's grown here on site at the Reptile Park, and he absolutely loves it when he's not getting distracted by turtles. Now, you can see as well, Hugo, he's got quite a long neck, but what a tortoise has the ability to do is actually withdraw the neck straight back inside the shell. Whereas you can see on a turtle like this here, they cannot do that. They typically will lay their head flat to the side against the shell here. So basically what they're doing, they're withdrawing the head slightly back into the shell, but not like a tortoise that could go completely inside. They're folding it to the side. And that is why we call these side-necked turtles. Now I might swap. Here we'll get our freshwater turtle out of the way, because I do want to show you a bit of variation amongst the tortoises. The Galapagos tortoise is the world's largest tortoise, and they are of course found on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador in South America. It's about 100 kilometers off the coast. They're highly evolved to live in that insular environment. They're very, very tough, very rugged, but that's not to say that other tortoise species are not. This is a smaller species known as the Leopard Tortoise, and they're found in Africa, another very harsh, arid environment. And whilst this one doesn't get quite as large as the Galaps, they're certainly just as tough. You can see here the same form of feet, very well designed for moving around on land. And of course they have this tough, rugged shell which they can use for protection. Now the top of the shell we call the carapace, and the bottom here we call a plustron. And the shell is made of exactly the same thing as our fingernails and hair. It's called keratin, and whilst it can be quite brittle, the shell here, it's very, very tough, and it allows those turtles and tortoises protection from whatever may be trying to predate on them. And of course, if you're a little leopard tortoise like this living in Africa, you've got all sorts of wildlife over there that would love to make a nice easy meal out of you. So that added layer of protection really helps this species to go about their life. And just like the Galapagos tortoise, they live for a very, very long time. They're not living quite as long. A Galapagos tortoise could live up to 200 years potentially, but these ones here could still live over 100 years of age. So a very, very long-lived animal, and one of my favourites.
So you were mentioning before about feet and flippers. Can they do the opposite? So can tortoises go in water and can turtles be on land?
Yeah, absolutely. So tortoises like this, they're not fantastic swimmers, but they can enter the water if they need to. They can certainly walk through shallow patches of water, and I have seen tortoises trying to swim, and they can swim a short distance if they need to. As I mentioned, they're not very good at it. Turtles, same deal. Spend most of their time in the water for the most part, but there are certain species that do spend a fair bit of time on land as well. A good example of that is the critically endangered Sulawesi forest turtle from Asia. And when they're juveniles, they're spending most of their time in the water, but then as they grow and they get a little larger, then they can spend extended periods out of the water up on land as well. So it really just depends on the species.
Can tortoises and turtles breed with one another?
They can't, no. So, the hybridization, I guess it could potentially occur, but I have not seen that occur, and it certainly wouldn't be a good thing there. Whilst they are very closely related and date back to a common ancestor, they're quite different, and that offspring that would be produced would not be a very healthy animal.
How does the diet change between, I guess, tortoises and turtles as individual species?
Yeah, so it is quite variable. For the most part, broadly speaking, tortoises like this are going to be feeding on vegetation. Out in the wild, this animal would be feeding on weeds, grasses, all that sort of thing. They're pretty well strictly vegetarians. They're feeding on those sorts of food items. Whereas turtles, they're a little more wide ranging in terms of what they're feeding on. We have certain species that are pretty well strictly carnivorous. They're only feeding on invertebrates and little prawns and things like that. Whereas you do have other species that will take those, and they'll also eat aquatic plants and things like that. So it's quite variable in terms of the turtles. The tortoises more tend to be herbivorous.
Do they all lay eggs?
They do, yes. Yeah. So the eggs look a little different. Tortoise eggs, for the most part, are typically quite round, almost like the size of a ping pong ball, and some of them have a fairly long incubation period. Whereas a turtle, they tend to lay more of a typical reptile egg. It tends to be a little bit more elongated, and they typically can incubate in quite short periods of time. So it just depends on the species you're talking about.
Are they dangerous as a species?
They're not, no. I mean, certainly a Galapagos tortoise the size of Hugo, he could give you a nasty bite. He doesn't have any teeth, but his beak, the mouth, is made of keratin as well, so it's quite hard and tough like the rest of him. So if he were to bite you, he could certainly give you a pretty nasty wound, but for the most part, they are very easygoing. All they want to do is be on their own for the most part and eat vegetation. Do
turtles breathe underwater?
They don't, no. So they do have to come to the surface in order to breathe air, and that includes the sea turtles, but they can go for extended periods without doing that. A sea turtle in particular could go for quite long dives before coming to the surface to take a breath.
Do you know what is the biggest species of turtle and the biggest species of tortoise in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of a turtle, that turtle would be a sea turtle, and it's called the leathery sea turtle, or sometimes called the leatherback sea turtle. Now these sea turtles could get over 3 meters in length, that's their shell, and can weigh over a ton in weight. So they are an incredibly large turtle. As far as a tortoise goes, well, he's coming back behind you now. Here's Hugo, and this is the largest species of tortoise on the face of the earth. There is another species which is found off the coast of Africa, known as the Leopard Tortoise. They also get very, very large, but this species gets that little bit larger, and they are the world's largest species of tortoise and one of the longest lived vertebrates on the face of the earth as well.
Do they have ears?
They do, yeah. If you look behind the eye here, it's covered by a scale, but that right there is Hugo's ear. Now, they don't have fantastic hearing, but what they do have is a very good sense of sight. You can see he's very in tune as to what's going on. He can see us from quite a long way away, particularly when we're coming down with some food. And they do also have a pretty good sense of smell as well.
Do you take Hugo on walks like this every day, or is this a special once-off occasion?
No. He's making it look like he's never been out before, but Hugo does come out every single day for a walk. We do this to keep him nice and fit and healthy, and also to allow him to feed on the grass that we have here, and also just, it's good for his well-being. He gets to come out, see a bunch of different things, and interact with the other animals as well.
How fast are both species, and is one faster than the other?
So it depends very much on the species. Turtles as a group, I would say, are a fair bit faster, particularly when they're basking up on the land. If they want to, they can shoot back into the water with quite a large amount of speed. A tortoise here, reasonably slow for the most part. What we're looking at here is about top speed for a Galapagos tortoise.
Do they change the colour of their skin kind of like a chameleon?
No, not typically. They will vary quite considerably from juvenile to adult. Typically the juveniles are far more vibrantly coloured than the adult, but they don't change their colour due to their mood or environment.
We've got a few questions about Hugo's shell. People are seeing the divots in it. What's that caused by?
So I mentioned before the carapace or the shell, it is just made of keratin, which is the same thing our fingernail and hair are made from. So all those marks you're seeing in the shell here are actually just wear and tear. Little bits can chip off, it breaks down a little bit, just like our fingernails would. And you've got to remember, Hugo's a very, very old animal. He's in his 60s and he's been here at the park since the early 1970s. So he's done a fair bit of living in his time, and he's starting to show a few of the signs of that.
Do they have any regenerative ability? So, say a skink can lose its tail and they can get their tail back. Can tortoises and turtles have that?
They can't, no. I have seen, particularly with sea turtles, you will quite often see a sea turtle missing a flipper, or missing a part of them. Maybe they've had a big chunk out of them. They cannot regrow that part of their body. Once they've lost a flipper, then typically it's just like a stump, and they can go on living their life. Often they'll still be reasonably good at swimming even with that injury.
So you mentioned before that they have eggs. Do they put them in nests like crocodiles?
They do, yeah. So it's not like a mound like what a crocodilian would make. They're basically just digging a hole, typically in soft sand, burying the eggs down in there, and then they'll go through that incubation period in there. There's no maternal care from the mother. She doesn't stay by the nest or anything of that nature. She lays the eggs, she leaves them, and then when they hatch out, they'll hatch out, and then they've got to fend for themselves.
Do they hibernate?
Certain species do, yes. It depends on the location in the world. For example, a tortoise living in southern Africa, where it does get quite cool, they might hibernate. A tortoise living up in Egypt may not, where it's a little bit warmer. But certainly any of the European species, where it gets very, very cold, they are going to be hibernating over winter, yes.
And one last question. Do they have good eyesight? And do turtles see underwater?
They do, yes. Tortoises in particular have very, very good eyesight, and Hugo, he can see us from a long way away, particularly when we're coming with food. A turtle, though, underwater, depends on the clarity of the water. Just like us, if we're swimming in dark, murky water, then we're not going to be able to see as well as we might in clear water. So it just depends on the water that they're in. Alright guys, we might finish up there. I hope you enjoyed watching Hugo cause havoc here this afternoon. There he is, he's eating his lunch now, he's finally settled down. I hope you have learnt a little bit about the difference between a turtle and a tortoise. They're both fantastic groups of animals. We're going to finish up here with Hugo eating his lunch, and we'd like to thank you again for tuning in. Bye bye guys, we'll see you next time.